Today we have Steph Watson on the podcast. She's the owner of Forever Lean, a coaching program dedicated to sustainable weight loss, which has transformed the lives of hundreds of women. She has been featured in media outlets such as Netflix, Vogue Australia, and Voyage Magazine Los Angeles. She has over a decade of experience working with celebrities, CEOs, moms, and everyone in between. Steph's mission is to help women get lean without sacrificing their relationship with food. We're excited to have her on. Steph, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. I'm happy to be here.
Absolutely. So, you know, everyone looks at you right now, and I was looking at your Instagram, and you obviously look very fit, very healthy right now. But I know it hasn't always been that way. There's always been a journey leading up to that. So, what were things like for you growing up, and how did you get into fitness?
So I was always into fitness. I grew up an athlete. Um, so that was kind of always covered for me. And then as a teenager, my athletic hours went down, but my athletic appetite stayed. So I was struggling with weight, probably from about 15. Again, I always did have the athlete, like I was always an athlete, I always trained, but I definitely didn't understand hormones and how that affects your weight and your health. So I didn't really feel healthy. Um, and I definitely didn't feel happy in my body. And I remember that from like a real early teenage stage. And it was a struggle for about a decade before I really got a handle on it, through a lot of extremes, a lot of trial and error, and a lot of research and getting different certifications. And yeah, that landed me with this program and the company I've built.
Awesome. Well, yeah, obviously quite a journey, and let's dive into it here a little bit. So, what sports did you play growing up?
I was a swimmer and a runner and soccer player and triathlete.
Got it. So obviously quite the athlete, played a number of different sports. So you mentioned that you weren't necessarily, as happy with where you were or how you're feeling. Can you describe what you mean by that?
Yeah, so like I said, I think teenage years and then going into college, I always tried to compensate with training, and that always worked as a kid. But then I did put on weight once I started drinking, partying, eating differently, eating out of the house. Um, and then in university, that just kind of got even more carried away with all of the above. But I always had such a desire to feel really good in my body. That was always super important to me. And so I struggled with that immensely. I always was trying to balance different worlds. And I think that I didn't know what to do to change my situation. So you get that hopeless feeling, right? Where you're like, well, what I'm doing is not really working. So I might as well do the fun thing, right? And I worked with many coaches over the years, and no one really seemed to, that I connected with, have the psychological piece in place and understand your relationship with food is super, super important when you're guiding someone to their path to weight loss. Because when you've been frustrated on your journey so many times, it leads to really unhealthy tendencies with food. Well, it did for me, anyways, whether that's bouts of like extreme eating, really healthy, and then binge eating, or whether that's like throwing the towel in and just not caring and eating everything and anything. So that was kind of the pattern I went down for a really long time, thinking that the extremes was the only way to get there, and not really having the tools to get me out of that. So I was in and out of bodybuilding shows. I trained for Ironman triathlon, but all of those were just extremes, thinking that that was the way that I was going to get control over my body. That was my bottom line. That's what I wanted, was what can I do to get there? And so I learned through Ironman that doing 30 hours of cardio a week, that doesn't get you there. And then I learned through bodybuilding a lot of self-discipline. I learned a lot about nutrition. I learned what it takes to get there, but I didn't learn what it takes to stay there. It was super regimented, and just very, just another extreme, right? There was no sustainability. But when you look around, or when I looked around, it was like other people are doing it sustainably. So why can't I? Why can't I get a handle on food? And so I did many different approaches: vegan, if it fits your macros, calorie counting, carb counting. I've kind of done it all before I landed on really focusing on hormones, gut health, and fixing my relationship with food.
Yeah, for sure. Obviously, sounds like quite the journey. Lots of ups and downs. So you said like you were obviously an athlete growing up in high school. So in college, when did you begin? Did you begin doing the triathlons and bodybuilding shows? Was that in college?
Yeah, that was in college.
Okay. So can you give like you said like you had kind of some examples, like what were some maybe examples of things that you struggle with kind of specifically when you were struggling with your diet, with your relationship with food?
I would say I would only eat like lean chicken breast and grilled vegetables for like a week, or I would like boil my chicken breasts to make sure I'm getting all the fat out of it, and no, at the time, no salt, and doing like 2 3 hours of exercise a day on top of that, so really driving my hormones into the ground and depression through the roof. So that was the extreme I would go to. And then when I wasn't on that path of obsession of staying really, really just on that, like what I thought was the perfect diet, then I would just be all throw the towel in, and I'd be drunk with my friends and we'd be getting, who knows, burritos, fries at nighttime. And then Sunday or Monday come and I would start the regiment all over again.
Hmm. So in college, so you said you kind of got into that unhealthy relationship. Like what? So did you do triathlon first then, or did you do bodybuilding?
I did triathlon first.
Okay. So what were some examples of ways that your body didn't respond like the way that you wanted to? Like you obviously mentioned you went in with the intention of thinking like this is really healthy, like this will help me, with my goals. Like what were your goals at that point?
My goal at that point was I just wanted to be a really, really, really lean athlete. And I think that that's a goal a lot of athletes have that they don't really talk about, especially dancers, runners. The name of the game, I've talked to a lot of them since, is just how lean can I be? And this is my tool to get me there. Right. So that was at the time, it was, I want to do Ironman. And I think partially I did because my sisters were doing it and we grew up in a town where it hosted Ironman Canada. So it would have been always cool to cross the finish line. But my goal was I wanted to be lean. That was my goal. And I was always like 15 pounds overweight. And I just didn't understand how doing that much didn't get me there. So I would do stuff like I wouldn't drink water the last 2 hours of my bike ride because I'd want to weigh myself when I got home from a 7 hour ride. I would isolate my social circle. So I wouldn't go out with friends or go out for meals, and I'd be weighing everything at home and weighing myself and taking measurements, and all just to try to get skinnier. That was like, that's all I cared about, was how skinny could I get. And it didn't really work, or it did, but it wouldn't work for long term, right?
If you're okay with me asking, like, why was you said you always felt like you were about 15 pounds overweight. Like, why was getting skinnier so important to you?
That's a really good question. I think I got a lot of my confidence from being thin and identifying as an athlete. And I think with that 15 pounds, it was more, I didn't like how I felt and I didn't like what was going on internally. And I thought that the way to feel better would be to be thinner. I thought that that would make me feel better about myself.
That's a good point. I think a lot of people feel that way. Like, so you obviously at some point did lose weight. Like when you got skinnier, did you know, in kind of in your words, what you were aiming for? Did you notice a change in your feelings about yourself?
Yeah, I did. I felt more confident, but again, I did it mostly in isolation. So that was when I finally got my body to where I wanted to be. I was bodybuilding. So I was working out twice a day. I was weighing all my food. I really learned a lot about nutrition and why I wasn't seeing the results I was seeing before. But I did it in such a way where I was so regimented. And if I went off, I don't even think I let myself go off for months. And then when I would, that's when kind of the binge eating habit would come to the surface, and it was just go back to restriction the next day. So it was healthy at the start, then calories dropped down and cardio went up. It was like I just got this ravenous animalistic feeling where I was just constantly obsessed with food.
What was the lowest your calories got to?
Probably 650, 700 a day.
So 650, 700 calories a day. Like, was this something that you cut it there yourself or you had someone helping you?
No, that was with a coach.
Got it. So, I mean, can you give an example? Like, what were you eating when you were only eating 650, 700 calories per day? Like, what did your diet look like?
40 pieces of asparagus and probably about 4 ounces of chicken, maybe 3 to 4 ounces of chicken breast, 5 to 6 times a day.
Yeah. You know the exact number, 40 asparagus.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
So like at this point, like when you were at your lowest calorie intake, like how did you feel mentally? Like were you just super low energy? Like how did you focus throughout the day? Like take me through that.
I remember I was a bartender, and I forgot about this until right now. I was a bartender, and I would wrap up my little piece of chicken breast with my asparagus into little foils, right? Because that's what I would eat 5 to 6 times a day. And I would just wait for the clock to be able to have my next one. And I remember I was bartending at the time, and it always helped when I kept busy. I could do it, and a lot of coffee. But I remember like I was bartending and one of the pegs got loose and I couldn't like pull the thing out because I was so weak. And I pulled on it and the whole thing like exploded. So beer started going everywhere. And I just didn't, my hormones were so messed up and I was so exhausted. I just curled down on the floor in the keg room and just cried because I was so tired. We were so busy and I didn't have enough energy and nutrients in my body to be able to like combat stress or it was like it was a low point for sure.
Holy cow. And how old were you at this point?
23.
Okay, so 23 years old. So and were you the weight that you wanted to be at this point?
Yes, I was.
Okay. So you basically lost the weight, but now you're at a point where you're eating 650, 700 calories a day, you're eating asparagus and chicken. And like you said, you just feel like you're damaging your hormones, like you weren't really feeling the greatest. So like how did you work to get out of this place? Like what happened next?
So fat burners at the time. So that carries you for a while, right? But eventually your body gets used to it and it doesn't work anymore. It doesn't give you that energy and you mentally get really tired of it. So I was okay for a couple of weeks doing that, but I ended up doing it for a couple of months because I did a few bodybuilding shows back to back. And then after that, I went back up to like 1,400 calories for a few months and I was really regimented and that's when I felt my best. I was having, oatmeal and eggs in the morning and clean meals throughout the day and Greek yogurt and almonds before bed, like the classic bodybuilder's diet. But then, I was surrounded with people that didn't really support my goals. My family definitely didn't understand it. They had a really hard time with it, which in hindsight, I understand why. But my partner at the time didn't support it either. So eventually it was like, you're 23, 24, you give into pressure and old habits die hard. You get back into drinking and I felt like I always had the option between like staying on track in isolation or going out and being social and eating like a normal person or what I thought was normal. And that's the battle I struggled with for years after.
Yeah, I bet. And were you already a personal trainer at this point?
Mm. When I was eating that way, that's when I was also getting my personal training certificate.
Got it. Got it. So you became, so let's kind of talk about that. So like, how did you get to a point where you were, really struggling, kind of aiming to be super lean, to like where you are right now? Like what was kind of the build up to now? You're obviously, people look at you, you're fit, you're in a much healthier spot. Like what were kind of the next steps that led you to getting healthier mentally, especially?
I would say a therapist was super helpful. I really couldn't have got to where I am today without one. And then having a team work for me. I struggled with my own personal health for the growth during the growth of my company, big time. So just kind of struggling behind the scenes was a big part of how I built this company. And not until I had a team and I have coaches and I work with my own coach and I have a therapist. Not until I put those things in place did I really get out of the place that I had put myself in for more than 10 years.
Hmm. So, what are some of kind of the biggest lessons or takeaways you've had that have helped you get healthier mentally? Like, what are some of the kind of the things that you uncovered?
Who you surround yourself with is everything. So you need people that are supporting you, because if you're making if you're around people where you feel like you have to choose being social, for me, that's the wrong person to be around, right? So that's number one. The other thing is you don't have to choose between feeling good and looking good. You can have it both ways. It just doesn't come as fast as you usually want it to, but it sticks and it's sustainable. And so the results you see, you can actually hold on to for long term.
Got it. So, how did you just, so like when you first started becoming a trainer, what type of people were you coaching at this point?
I was coaching beginners, so people that really had a lot of weight to lose or didn't kind of know where to start on their journey, had never really worked out before.
So right now you coach a lot of women on, sustainable weight loss, overcoming, without sacrificing their relationship with food, which now for everyone listening, you can obviously understand why, Steph has a personal background on this. So how did you kind of decide that that was going to be your focus? Did it just kind of have to happen naturally at that point?
Of who I help. So I'm looking for always when I'm taking people into this program, it doesn't really matter where you're at physically for me. It matters where you are mentally. And this sounds morbid, but I'm looking for the women that are like, I don't know how to get off this cycle. I don't know how to stop doing what I'm doing, whether that's like a 21-day fix and then going and binging on chocolate at night, or my self-esteem is so bad because my habits and my relationship with food and my self-talk are so bad. So regardless of what, if someone's a stay-at-home mom or they're an athlete or they're a CEO or whoever they are, it doesn't matter. It's that I'm looking for people with that pain, because that's the pain that I know so well. And that's the pain that I spent over a decade solely trying to get out of. And I built my entire company around that, is being able to spread the word to people that you can feel like you're in such a dark place and you can feel like food is such a big part of you, and you can feel like your body is just all consuming and it's never going to be different, and teaching women that it can be.
So let's say you have someone coming to you who is struggling with that, who is, had an unhealthy relationship with food, who is in that constant yo-yo cycle with dieting, who seems so overwhelmed and like there's no hope. How do you even begin to work with that person?
Yeah, that's a good question. That's almost everyone we work with. Um, Basically, what we do is we take what the person's doing. So our program is a super high touch program. So we send a form and it really learns all about them, symptoms they're having, their relationship with food, what does their day to day look like, who do they live with, what is their everything, right? Whether we're looking at magnesium deficiency, iron deficiencies, or what their like social life is like and what they like to do, what are their non-negotiables. All these things come into place when you're trying to create a program for women that struggle with their relationship with food and their body. You can't just bring someone in and say, how much do you weigh, What do you want to weigh? Here's your macros. It doesn't work like that for women that have a psychological issue with their bodies and food, right? So everyone comes in sort of with a clean slate, and we just, step one is just, how much can we learn about you? What are your favorite foods? What does food mean to you? Those are things are really important. If you need to go out and have a glass of wine, we need to know that, right? If you think fasting is like, feels like brings you back to days when you were anorexic, we need to know that. If you don't want to meal prep and you want to eat out every meal, we want to know that, because then we can find restaurants that you're going to that you can eat healthy at, or we can find places that deliver whatever it is. We always meet the person where they are. We never have an agenda of what we want them to be doing. There's such a big part of the conversation. How do you feel about this? What if we do this? What's your idea here? What's not working for you? And it's really a discussion. We have a trained counselor on the team, and so she's always a part of that conversation. And I'm a trained behavior change specialist. So really making sure that the client is collaborating with us. And we're just women having conversations with other women. That's it.
So you said you're a behavior change specialist. So what are some things that you've learned through becoming a behavior change specialist? So you obviously mentioned environment, who you surround yourself with being one thing. What are some other things that you've kind of discovered with people as well?
For yourself, I think the big thing is, if you want to do a behavior, you got to make it really easy. So that's why I do my workouts as home workouts, and that's why they're as short as possible, and that's why they're minimal equipment. Because if you want to do something, you have to make it really easy. If you don't want to do something, you have to make it really hard, right? So cleaning out the kitchen, whatever behavior you're trying to pinpoint, make it challenging for yourself. But that's kind of, we all sort of know that in mainstream now. But as a coach, get a client to change. And this is the hardest thing as a coach, even for me now. The client has to come up with the solution. And that's really hard, because women are coming into our program and they want us as experts to tell them what to do, but we need to just guide them through their own choices. And that's a hard thing to do as a coach, because you're sitting there being like, I know the answer to this, I know what they should do, but you don't know the answer to this. You're not an expert on their life, only they're an expert on their life, right? So sitting back as a coach and helping the person come up with their own solutions is the best way to see someone change.
So one of the things that I want to talk about as well, that we were previously talking about before we started recording, was gut health. And it was something that you mentioned that you struggled with before. So you mind sharing a little bit about like your struggles with gut health and how you've kind of worked on overcoming them?
Yeah, so gut health is definitely a huge part of the program that I teach, because it's so intertwined with our mood and the choices that we make, right? So everything we put into our gut is going to affect our psyche, and that's really something that is not in. People are starting to really talk about it more now. There's more probiotics and that out there, but there's definitely, when it comes to gut health, just like when it comes to changing behavior, there's not a one size fits all approach, right? So someone could have gut health issues because they have SIBO, they have bacteria from their intestine coming in and disrupting. You wouldn't want to give someone a probiotic who's dealing with that. You could have someone who it's stress induced. So figuring out their cortisol and bringing stress levels down is going to help them. It could be an allergy. Common allergens are vegetables, too much fiber, dairy, nuts, obviously processed foods, gluten, and alcohol are going to affect your gut environment too. But there's so much going on in the gut that comes from a psychological point of view. That's kind of, that combined with food, that's kind of the jigsaw puzzle that is different for everybody. And so that comes back to really getting to know the client and who we're working with, to know what the issue is stemming from, and that it's different for every single person.
What are some of the biggest, like, it's obviously kind of a trendy topic right now. Like, what are some of the biggest misconceptions you see about gut health?
A probiotic, always. I think that a probiotic can do more harm than good sometimes. It's definitely not for everybody. I think that I was vegan for a while, and that's when I really learned that like not all seeds and nuts and grains and vegetables are good for us. Um, I think that there's a lot of fillers in the health food products. So I know a lot of people that are like, I've been keto or I've done this, that, and the other, and then they're eating these packaged foods that are labeled as vegan or non-GMO and all these things, but they're still filled with emulsifiers and thickeners and preservatives and food dyes and artificial flavors. And so no, I'm needing to know all of that and without overwhelming people with stuff, but what works for someone's not going to work for someone else. So someone might respond really poorly to like monk fruit or stevia or something that's like deemed. Some people respond really negatively to food coloring. So knowing those certain things, or like even wheatgrass, which is in tons of greens. So that could really be disrupting people. So I would say those are common misconceptions. I think that um, the biggest thing that gets overlooked with gut health is your pace of consumption. So when you're chewing your food, 20% of your digestion is happening in your mouth. You need that salivary amylase to break down your food. So if you're just kind of chewing 3, 4 times and just shoveling back food, it could be really as simple as that. I think the common myth is we need to overcomplicate gut health, and it is a very complex topic, but there are also simple solutions that really, really make a big difference.
Yeah, for sure. What are some other things that you previously believed, maybe when you were in your early 20s, like struggling with some of these, you know, some of this eating that you no longer believe?
High protein or high fiber diet.
Okay,
I
expand on that.
I don't believe a lot of us need fiber. I know I'm one of those people. I have virtually a zero fiber diet and I feel amazing. Um, Low sodium diet I used to have, and now I put salt on absolutely everything. Um, Even as an athlete, and if you struggle with any type of hormonal issues, you don't necessarily need a lot of carbohydrates, which as an athlete, I was always loading up on bananas and oatmeal and whatever. Um, so I'd say those are the big ones, what I was doing wrong.
Fiber, that's obviously a topic that's been talked about a lot recently, and I've even seen like correlations with like gut health. Like a lot of people believe you need more fiber, but in what situations might someone not need as much fiber?
So it really depends on the person. Like it can come down to specific vegetables, right? And that's why I always just like to monitor what's going on with some people. Some people really want to have a high fiber diet, and I think that there's something to be said about that. Like if there's someone who loves a lot of fruit and vegetables in their diet and grains and seeds, I believe in listening to that because a really big component in our gut health is feeling good about what we're eating. And I know that sounds like hippie, woo woo, whatever, but it really does change the way you're breaking down your food. So if someone comes to me and they're like, I don't want to eat red meat, I don't want to eat eggs, I don't want to eat chicken, whatever it is they don't want to eat. Well, if I say, well, you should be eating that, the way that they're going to break that food down is going to be different than someone who's super excited to be eating that because your hormones start before you start eating, right? The digestive process starts before you put anything in your mouth. So if someone's feeling stressed or uneasy or they're not enjoying what they're eating and they don't believe in it, it's going to change their results.
Absolutely. One thing you mentioned, as well, is that obviously you have gone through a lot of struggles with your own nutrition. Do you believe that in order to be a coach or an effective coach with what you're doing, it has really helped that you've gone through a lot of those things yourself?
I think that without really knowing, I became an expert on addiction. So I don't think it needs to be necessarily food, but I do think I don't know. I think whatever you do, as long as you care and you're listening and you're client centered, I think you can get really good at it. I don't think you have to have known what it feels like to struggle the exact way a client's struggling. But I do think you need to know what it's like to struggle. But I think that everyone does, right? So as long as you can bring in some type of struggle and you can really resonate with the pain the person's going through, I think that that makes you a good coach.
Yeah, absolutely. So what does your training look like now? Like what are you working toward? Like what do your workouts look like? What does your nutrition look like now that you're, not in that same headspace that you were previously?
My workouts are similar to what I do in the program. I do about 30 minutes a day, all body weight, some light weights and bands. Um, Focused on, like, I love deep core training. I like mobility training. I like glutes training and posture training. Those are kind of the small movements, lightweight training I like to do. And then as far as diet goes, I have a very, very high protein diet. I would say my diet's about 80 to 90% protein. That's how I feel my best. So I have very little fruits and vegetables in my diet, virtually no seeds, even though I love nuts and seeds. Virtually no nuts. I like a lot of dairy. I am about 90% carnivore, I would say, but the difference is if there's a meal or a time I don't feel like being that way, then I'm not. But if I'm ever wanting to circle back to feeling my best, I mean, chicken breasts and egg whites and seafood and steak and bone broth, that's what I always come back to. So that is largely what my diet is now.
Got it. How did you come about that? Like how long have you been following a plan kind of like that?
Mm, so when I came out of being vegan, I was in the hospital twice when I was vegan with gut issues. And then what happened was I was living with a doctor at the time who was all about the carnivore keto diet. And I was like, I grew up on meat. We always ate meat and potatoes or meat and rice growing up. So I went, as the extremist I went all meat and I went like virtually no carbs, no nothing. And my body leaned out. I felt amazing. And that was the first time where I really circled back to um, going more towards like the path that felt good. I would say that would be the first time, but then I lost myself along the way because if you're going to go keto or carnivore, I'm naturally definitely keto. But I'm naturally carnivore most days too. To do that successfully, you have to know certain things. Hydration is super important. Doing it gradually can be really important. Making sure you don't feel restricted can be really important. So I ebbed and flowed out of that for 4 years, I would say, before it really just became my natural way of eating.
Absolutely. Thanks for sharing. If someone's feeling stuck or struggling right now and they just can't seem to get out of their own heads, their own cycle, what would your advice be to that person?
If what you're doing, you've been trying for a while and not seeing results, you gotta change because we get really stuck in our heads, especially with all the information that's out there. That's like, you think you know. Everyone thinks they're super educated, but when you're looking in on your own journey, you're missing really the big keys. And a lot of those, the big one people are missing is self compassion within their approach. And so I would say if you can't hire professional support, talk to someone in your life to support you because it does not take an Einstein or a nutrition coach to look over what you're doing and to say, oh, this kind of, I don't know about this, right? Because it's simple sometimes. So I just think talking to someone, whether that's professional or personal, on what you're struggling with and painting out in front of them, like whether you do this personally or you do this on your own, write down everything you're eating and how you're feeling after to connect the dots quite quickly.
Love that. So I know we're bumping up on time here, and I want to finish with two questions. So the first question is, where can people find out more about you?
I'm mostly on my Instagram at Steph Watson Health.
All right, we'll link that in the show notes. And then last question is, let's say we're fast forwarding now. It's the end of your life. You've achieved everything that you've wanted to achieve, accomplished all you wanted to accomplish. How do you want to be remembered?
Well, that's a big one. I think I want to be remembered as someone who gave people like a second chance at their life when they thought that like that was it for them. When they thought like this is where I'm stuck, and I came across Steph for whatever reason, and it changed the game for me, and I got my life back again in a way that I didn't think was possible.
Absolutely love it. And thanks so much for sharing all your wisdom today. I know everyone who's listening to this will definitely get something out of it from the kind of trials and tribulations you've gone through to where you've gotten to now. And we appreciate you sharing your story today.
Thanks for having me. Happy to be here.